The first time my own daughter took my house keys. I was standing on my front porch at 70 years old, holding 2 grocery bags while rain soaked through my sweater. I knocked 3 times. My daughter finally opened the door and said, "Mom, you really need to stop coming and going whenever you want. This house has to work for all of us now." The house she was talking about had been mine for 38 years. My name was on every document, every bill, every memory. And as she slipped my keys into her pocket and told me to ask permission before entering my own home, she had no idea that everything she depended on was still legally mine. And I was finally ready to remember that. If my story touches something in your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt invisible inside your own family? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Sometimes sharing our stories reminds us that none of us are truly alone. My name is Linda Parker. I turned 70 last spring. For most of my life, I believed that if you loved your children enough, they would always remember who stood beside them when life became difficult. I was wrong. My husband, Robert, died 6 years ago from a heart attack. We had been married for 42 years. After he passed away, the house became very quiet. Too quiet. The house sat in a small neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. Robert and I bought it in 1988. We raised our only daughter, Emily. There, every room carried memories. The kitchen still smelled like cinnamon every Christmas. The backyard still had the oak tree Robert planted when Emily was born. And my bedroom still had his reading chair beside the window. After Robert died, I learned how to live alone. It wasn't easy, but I managed. I received his pension. I had my own retirement income. The mortgage had been paid off for years. Financially, I was comfortable. Emotionally, I was lonely. Emily lived about 40 minutes away with her husband, Mark, and their 10-year-old daughter, Sophie. For years, they visited every other weekend. Then 2 years ago, everything changed. Emily called me one evening. "Mom, can we come over tomorrow?" Her voice sounded nervous. The next afternoon, she sat at my kitchen table with tears in her eyes. Mark stared at his coffee. I already knew something was wrong. Emily finally said, "Mark's company is laying people off." Mark spoke quietly. My position was eliminated. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "I'm sorry." Emily wiped her eyes. "We can manage for a while, but things are tight." Over the next few months, things became worse. Mark struggled to find work. Their savings disappeared. Credit card bills piled up. Emily started working extra hours at a dental office. One night, Emily called me crying. "Mom, we might lose the apartment." My heart broke. I could hear Sophie crying in the background. Without thinking, I said the words that changed my life. "Come stay with me." Emily was silent. "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. Only until we get back on our feet." I smiled. This house is big enough for all of us. 2 weeks later, they moved in. I gave Sophie my late husband's office as her bedroom. I helped Emily organize the closets. Mark promised me several times, "We won't stay long." I told him not to worry. I truly believed we were becoming a family again. The first few months felt wonderful. The house felt alive. Sophie laughed in the hallways. Emily cooked dinner with me. Mark cut the grass. For the first time since Robert died, I wasn't eating alone. I remember one evening, Emily looked around the dining room and smiled. It feels like old times. I felt tears in my eyes. I've missed this. At first, they insisted on helping with bills. I refused. You save your money, Emily protested. Mom, that's not fair. I can handle it. And I could. I paid the electric bill, the water bill, the property taxes, the insurance, the internet, the groceries. I never complained. I considered it an investment in my family. Months passed. Mark found another job, but it paid less. Emily continued working. They said they needed more time to save money. I agreed. 1 year became almost 2. Slowly, small things started changing. At first, I ignored them. Emily began rearranging furniture. She moved Robert's chair into the basement. She replaced my curtains. She changed the kitchen decorations. I told myself she was simply trying to help. One afternoon, I came home from church and couldn't find several family photographs. Emily said, I packed them away. The room looked cluttered. I felt uncomfortable. Those pictures had been on that wall for 30 years. Still, I said nothing. Then Mark installed a television in the family room. He began watching sports every evening. The room that once belonged to Robert and me no longer felt familiar. Sometimes I sat alone in my bedroom. I told myself not to be selfish. After all, they were family. One evening, I heard Emily talking on the phone. She didn't know I was standing nearby. We're finally getting settled here. The word here caught my attention. Not Mom's house, not Linda's house. Here, as if it already belonged to them. A few weeks later, Emily asked me something strange. Mom, have you thought about simplifying things? What do you mean? Maybe putting some things into storage. I looked around the living room. My things. She laughed softly. Not all of them, just some. I suddenly felt like a guest. But every bill still arrived in my name. Every tax statement, every insurance document, every utility account. Everything belonged to me. Yet somehow, I had started asking permission to use my own kitchen. I remember standing in the hallway one night. Emily was explaining household rules to Sophie. No snacks in the living room. Take your shoes off. Keep the front room clean, Sophie asked. Whose house is this? There was a short silence. Emily answered. Our house. I stood there, completely still. She didn't know I heard her. Maybe she didn't realize what she had said. Or maybe she did. That night, I sat in Robert's old chair in the basement, the chair Emily had moved downstairs. I ran my hand across the worn armrest. For the first time, a question entered my mind. Had I invited my family into my home, or had I slowly given my home away at that moment? I still believed love would fix everything. I still believed Emily was simply stressed. I still believed my daughter would never intentionally hurt me. I had no idea that the first thing she would eventually take from me wasn't money. It wasn't the house. It wasn't my authority. It was something much smaller. A set of keys. And when those keys disappeared, so did the illusion that my daughter still saw me as her mother instead of an obstacle. The first thing Emily changed was the living room. The second thing she changed was me. At first, the changes seemed small. One Saturday morning, I walked downstairs and found my blue curtains missing. New gray curtains covered the windows. I looked at Emily. "Where are my curtains?" She smiled. "I donated them. They looked outdated." I stared at her. "You donated them. I thought you'd like the new ones." She never asked. She simply decided. I wanted to say something. Instead, I nodded. That became my biggest mistake. Every time I stayed quiet, Emily moved one step further. A week later, she replaced my dishes. The yellow plates Robert and I bought during our 25th anniversary disappeared from the kitchen. She bought modern white dishes. Gumayi. "These look cleaner," she said. I opened the cabinet. "My plates are gone. They're in the garage." The garage, as if 30 years of memories belonged beside old paint cans. Mark supported every decision. "Emily has a good eye. She's helping. Change can be good." I began hearing that word often. Change. But nobody asked if I wanted any. One evening, I came downstairs wearing my favorite sweater. Emily looked at me. "Mom, maybe you should stop wearing that one." I looked down. "Why? It makes you look older." I laughed quietly. "I am older." She didn't laugh. Instead, she said something that stayed with me. "We're trying to keep things fresh around here. Around here, again. Not your house. Not your home. Around here." As if I lived inside their world. I started spending more time in my bedroom. It was the only place that still felt like mine. The photographs of Robert remained. His watch sat beside my bed. His books remained on the shelf. Everything else downstairs slowly disappeared. One afternoon, I returned from lunch with a friend. I opened the front door and stopped. My favorite chair was gone. The chair where I read every evening. The chair Robert bought me for my 60th birthday. I walked into the kitchen. "Emily, where's my chair?" "Oh, we moved it." "Where?" "The basement." I couldn't believe it. "Why?" Mark answered. "The family room feels bigger now." I walked downstairs. The chair sat beside old boxes. Dust covered the arms. I ran my hand across the fabric. For a moment, I wanted to cry. Instead, I sat there alone. That chair had held me after Robert died. It had carried me through countless sleepless nights. To Emily, it was furniture. To me, it was memory. A few days later, my church friend Nancy came to visit. We sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Nancy looked around. "The house looks different," Emily answered before I could speak. "We've been updating things." Nancy smiled politely. When Emily left the room, Nancy leaned closer. "Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "Of course." But she looked unconvinced. After she left, Emily said something that surprised me. "Mom, You don't need to tell people everything. What do you mean? Some people think older people get confused. I stared at her. I know exactly what's happening. She smiled. I didn't mean it that way, but somehow, I felt she did. As months passed, new rules appeared. No television after 10, no leaving lights on, no eating in the living room, no visitors without notice. One evening, I invited my sister Diane for lunch. Emily came into my room. You should probably ask before inviting people. I blinked. Ask who? She folded her arms. We all live here. I looked directly at her. It's my sister. I know, but it affects everyone. I felt something cold inside my chest. For 70 years, I had opened my front door to whoever I wished. Now I needed permission. One Sunday after church, I brought home a pie from a bake sale. Sophie smiled. Grandma brought pie. Emily frowned. We're avoiding sugar. I laughed. It's one pie. She took it from my hands. We're trying to teach healthy habits. That evening, I found the pie in the trash, almost untouched. I stood there staring at it. A simple pie, a small thing, but suddenly, everything felt enormous. The next morning, I sat outside with my coffee. Mark joined me. For a moment, things felt normal. Then he said, Have you ever thought about downsizing? I looked at him. What? A smaller place? Less maintenance? I felt my stomach tighten. This house is fine. He shrugged. I'm just saying, maybe eventually. Eventually. The words stayed with me all day. That evening, I heard Emily and Mark talking in the kitchen. They didn't know I was in the hallway, Emily said. She can't keep this place forever. Mark answered quietly. Just give it time. Emily sighed. I don't want to keep living like guests. Guests? I almost laughed. The people living rent-free considered themselves guests. Meanwhile, I had become invisible. A few days later, Sophie entered my room. She sat beside me. Grandma. Yes. Sweetheart. She looked nervous. Mom says old people forget things. I felt my heart stop. What? She says we have to help you. I forced a smile. Do I seem confused? She shook her head. No. I kissed her forehead. Good. After she left, I sat quietly. I began remembering conversations, comments, little remarks. Emily correcting me in front of people, speaking for me, answering questions directed at me. Had she been creating a picture? Had she been convincing people I couldn't manage my own life? I didn't know. But for the first time, I became afraid. Not because of my daughter. Because of how easily people believe older women are weak. One afternoon, I returned from the grocery store. I couldn't find my spare keys. I checked the kitchen drawer, the basket near the door, the cabinet. Nothing. I asked Emily, Have you seen my spare keys? She looked up from her phone. No. Later that evening, I checked again. Still missing. 2 days later, the garage key disappeared. A week after that, the back door key was gone. Small things. Tiny things. But suddenly, I noticed something. Emily always seemed to know where every key was. She always locked the doors herself. She always checked the deadbolt. One night before bed, I looked at my key ring. Only one key remained. The front door key. I held it tightly. At that moment, I didn't realize I was holding the last piece of control I still had inside my own home. And my daughter was already planning to take that too. The day my daughter took my keys started like any other Sunday. I went to church at 9 in the morning. Church had become my safe place after Robert died. I sat in the third row every week beside Nancy and Carol. For 1 hour, I felt like myself again. That Sunday, Pastor Wilson spoke about forgiveness. I remember writing one sentence in my notebook. Love without respect becomes sacrifice. At the time, I didn't understand why those words stayed with me. After church, Nancy invited me to lunch. "You've seemed tired lately," she said. I smiled. "I'm fine." She shook her head. "No, you're carrying something." I almost told her. I almost explained how my own house no longer felt like mine. But I didn't. I was embarrassed. What kind of 70-year-old woman admits that her daughter controls her? I returned home around 2 o'clock. I parked in the driveway. As I reached into my purse, my hand froze. My front door key was gone. I searched every pocket, my wallet, my coat. Nothing. I stood there confused. I always kept my key on the same ring. Always. I rang the bell. Emily opened the door. She looked surprised. "Why are you ringing? My key is gone." She hesitated. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in." Something about her voice felt strange. I entered the kitchen. My key ring sat on the counter, except one key was missing. The house key. I picked it up. "Where's my key?" Emily crossed her arms. "We took it." I looked at her. "What?" Mark walked into the room. "We've been meaning to talk to you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You took my house key," Emily sighed. "Mom, this is for safety." "Safety?" She sat down. "We worry about you." I stared at her. "Worry about what?" "Sometimes you forget things." I felt cold. "I do not." Mark spoke calmly. "Nobody's saying something is wrong." "Then why did you take my key?" Emily looked at me as if I were a child. "You don't really need it." I actually laughed. "I don't need the key to my own house. We're always here." "What if you're not?" She shrugged. "You can call." For several seconds, nobody spoke. I finally said, "Give me my key." Emily looked uncomfortable. "We think this is better." I felt my face growing hot. "This is my home," she answered quietly. "We all live here." That sentence changed something inside me. Not because she said it, because she believed it. I looked around the kitchen. My dishes were gone. My decorations were gone. My husband's chair sat in the basement. And now, my daughter had taken my key. One object, one small piece of metal, but it represented everything. control, permission, ownership, respect. I walked upstairs. I sat on my bed. For almost an hour, I stared at Robert's photograph. "What would you do?" I whispered. I already knew the answer. Robert never allowed anyone to disrespect me, not even family. That evening, Sophie entered my room. "Grandma?" I smiled. "Yes." "Are you sad?" "A little." She sat beside me. "Mom says the keys are safer with her." I looked at her carefully. "Did your mom say why?" Sophie nodded. "She says older people lose things." I felt my chest tighten. I had never lost my keys. Not once. After dinner, I decided to drive to the grocery store. As I reached for my purse, I realized something. The garage key was gone. The side door key was gone. Only my car key remained. I walked back inside. "Emily." She looked up. "What? Where are the other keys?" She avoided my eyes. "We put them away." "Why?" "You don't need all of them." I felt anger for the first time. Real anger. "I want them back." She stood. "Mom, why are you making this difficult?" Difficult. As if I were the problem. Mark joined the conversation. "We're only trying to help." "By taking my keys." Emily sighed loudly. "You're getting upset over nothing." Nothing. I walked away before I said something I would regret. Later that evening, I called my sister Diane. She listened quietly. Then she said, "Linda, that's not normal." "I know." "Did you give them permission?" "No." She was silent. Finally, she asked, "Do they think the house belongs to them?" I didn't answer, because I already knew. The next morning, I went outside to water my flowers. My neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, waved from across the street. She walked over. "How are you feeling?" I looked confused. "Fine." She hesitated. "Emily said you've been having memory issues." My heart stopped. "What?" "She said you're forgetting things lately." I couldn't speak. Mrs. Jenkins looked embarrassed. "Maybe I misunderstood." I forced a smile. "No, you understood." When she left, I sat on the porch. My own daughter was telling people I wasn't well. Why? To explain the missing keys, to justify controlling me, or something worse. That evening, I overheard another conversation. Emily was speaking to a friend on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard my name. "Mom just gets confused sometimes." My hands began shaking. "We're trying to keep an eye on her." I quietly returned to my room. Confused, forgetful, unsafe. The picture was becoming clearer, and I didn't like what I saw. Around 9 that night, Emily knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom?" "Yes." "We're only doing this because we love you." I looked directly at her. "Then give me my keys." She looked down. "We're not discussing this again." She walked away. I sat in silence. For the first time in my life, my daughter had made a decision about me without me. And she had done it inside a house that legally belonged to me. As I prepared for bed, I noticed something else. The small basket near the front door was empty. No spare keys. No garage key. Nothing. Everything had disappeared. I didn't know it yet, but Emily wasn't preparing me for safety. She was preparing me for obedience. And very soon, she would take something far worse than my keys. She would make me ask permission to enter my own home. 2 weeks after Emily took my keys, the rain came. I still remember that night. It was Thursday. Cold. Windy. The kind of Ohio evening that makes people hurry home before dark. That afternoon, I had driven to the pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication. Afterward, I stopped at the grocery store and bought soup, bread, and Sophie's favorite cookies. I wanted to surprise her. The entire drive home, I told myself things would improve. Maybe Emily was stressed. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe mothers and daughters simply go through difficult seasons. I still wanted to believe that. I pulled into the driveway around 6:30. The house lights were on. I grabbed the grocery bags and walked toward the front door. I reached for the handle. Locked. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Nothing. I could hear the television inside. I rang the bell. Still nothing. Rain began falling. At first, it was light. Then it became heavier. I walked around to the side door. Locked. The garage. Locked. I stood there, holding 2 grocery bags while rain soaked my coat. Finally, Emily opened the front door. She looked irritated. "Mom, why didn't you call?" I stared at her. "What? You know the doors stay locked?" "I've lived here for 38 years. She crossed her arms. "We've talked about this." I stepped toward the door. She didn't move. "Emily, you need to call first." I could barely believe what I was hearing. I was gone for 1 hour. Things are different now. Rain ran down my face. "I live here." She sighed loudly. "Mom, please don't make this a problem." I walked inside. Mark sat on the couch watching television. He never looked up. I set the groceries on the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking. Sophie walked into the room. "Grandma, you're wet," Emily answered. "Your grandmother forgot to call." Forgot? Again? Everything became forgetting. I quietly walked upstairs. I changed my clothes. I sat on the edge of my bed. For the first time since Robert died, I cried. Not because of the rain, not because of the locked door, because my own daughter had made me feel like a visitor. Later that evening, there was a knock. Sophie entered carrying a towel. "Mom said to give you this." I smiled. "Thank you." She hesitated. "Grandma." "Yes." "Why were you outside?" I looked at her. "Because the door was locked." She looked confused. "But you live here." The words hurt, because even a 10-year-old understood. That night, I could not sleep. Around midnight, I went downstairs for water. The television was still on. Mark sat alone. He looked surprised. "Can't sleep?" "No." I poured water into a glass. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, "Did you know the door was locked?" He avoided my eyes. Emily worries. About what? He sighed. Your age. My age. She thinks it's safer. I stared at him. I raised her. I know. I paid for this house. I know. Why didn't you open the door? He finally looked at me. Because she's trying to help. I returned upstairs, but before I reached my room, I heard him speaking quietly on the phone. At first, I ignored it. Then I heard my name. She's getting emotional. A pause. We're trying to ease her into the idea. Another pause. Eventually, assisted living might be best. I stopped breathing. Assisted living. I stood in the hallway. My own son-in-law was discussing moving me out of my house, the house I owned, the house I paid for, the house that belonged to me. I returned to my room without making a sound. For the rest of the night, I stared at the ceiling. Was this why they took my keys? Was this why Emily told people I was forgetful? Was this why neighbors suddenly asked about my memory? A picture was forming, and it terrified me. The next morning, Emily acted normal. She made coffee. She packed Sophie's lunch. She smiled, as if nothing had happened. I finally asked, "Did you talk to anyone about assisted living?" She froze. "What?" I heard Mark. Her face changed. "Mom, nobody is sending you anywhere." "Then why discuss it?" She folded her arms. "We have to think about the future." "My future?" "Yes." I felt anger rising. "I'm perfectly capable." She shook her head. "You don't always see things clearly." That sentence hit me harder than the locked door, because it meant she truly believed it, or wanted others to believe it. That afternoon, I visited Carol, my neighbor. She was 74, widowed, strong. She listened quietly. When I finished speaking, she asked one question. "Whose name is on the house?" "Mine." "The accounts, mine. The taxes, mine." She leaned forward. "Then why are you acting like a guest?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Years of being a mother had taught me to sacrifice, to forgive, to understand. But nobody teaches mothers what to do when their own children stop seeing them as people. That evening, another strange thing happened. Emily handed me a piece of paper. "What's this?" "It's emergency information." I looked down. Doctor, medication, insurance, emergency contact. She had listed herself. I looked at her. "Why?" "In case something happens." "Nothing is happening." She smiled gently. "We're just preparing." Preparing. Everything seemed to be preparation. The missing keys, the locked doors, the conversations, the concern, the neighbors, the comments about memory. I suddenly understood something. Emily wasn't treating me like her mother. She was treating me like a problem to manage. Later that night, I opened the file cabinet in my bedroom. Inside were decades of documents. The deed, insurance papers, tax records, savings accounts, retirement statements. Robert always kept everything organized. As I looked through those papers, one fact became clear. Everything was still in my name. Everything. The house, the car, the accounts, the investments, the insurance. Everything. And yet, I had somehow allowed my daughter to convince me that I needed permission to enter my own front door. I closed the drawer. For the first time in months, I felt something new. Not fear, not sadness. Clarity. The next morning, I picked up my phone. I searched for one name, Susan Miller, the attorney who had helped Robert and me write our wills years earlier. My finger hovered above the call button. Because I knew something. Once I made that call, things would never be the same. But after standing in the rain outside my own home, I realized something else. I had already lost enough, and I wasn't willing to lose everything. I called Susan Miller the following Monday. My hand trembled as I dialed her office. Susan had been our attorney for nearly 20 years. She helped Robert and me write our wills, update our insurance documents, and organize our estate after he retired. When her assistant answered, I almost hung up. Instead, I said, "This is Linda Parker. I need to see Susan." The appointment was scheduled for Wednesday morning. I told Emily I had a doctor's appointment. I wasn't ready to tell her the truth. Wednesday arrived. I drove downtown alone. For the first time in months, I felt nervous and guilty. Why? Because mothers are taught that protecting themselves somehow hurts their children. Susan walked into the office with the same warm smile I remembered. "Linda." She hugged me. "It's been too long." I sat down. For a few minutes, we talked about Robert. Then she noticed my face. "What's wrong?" I looked at my hands. "My daughter took my house keys." Susan became very quiet. For almost an hour, I told her everything. The missing keys, the locked door, the conversations, the comments about my memory, the discussion about assisted living. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she opened a file. "Let's review everything." She pulled out copies of my documents. The house deed, the trust documents, insurance, bank accounts, investments, retirement accounts, car title, everything. She looked directly at me. "Linda, the house belongs entirely to you." I nodded. "I know. No one else is listed." "What about Emily?" "Nothing." "What about Mark?" "Nothing." I felt my shoulders relax. Susan continued. "Your accounts are solely in your name. My savings, yours. My investments, yours. My insurance, yours." For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. Then Susan asked a question. "Have you signed any power of attorney documents?" I frowned. "No." She looked relieved. "Good." I looked at her. "Why?" She opened another folder. "Your daughter called my office 8 months ago." My heart stopped. "What?" Susan nodded. She asked questions about medical powers of attorney. I stared at her. "What did she say?" "She said she wanted to help you organize your affairs." I couldn't speak. Emily had contacted my attorney. Without telling me. Months ago. Susan continued carefully. She requested information packets. Did you send them? No. Why not? Because I needed your permission. I sat completely still. The missing keys suddenly seemed much bigger. This had not started recently. It had been happening for months, maybe longer. Susan leaned forward. Linda, I want to ask something difficult. I nodded. Do you believe your daughter is trying to protect you? I thought about Emily. I thought about the rain, the locked doors, the neighbors, the comments. Finally, I answered honestly. I don't know anymore. Susan nodded. Then you need to protect yourself. Those words changed me. Protect yourself. Nobody had said that to me. Everyone talked about protecting Emily, protecting Sophie, protecting the family. Nobody asked who was protecting me. Susan made several recommendations. First, change all online passwords. Second, review beneficiary information. Third, secure important documents. Fourth, document every incident. Write everything down. Everything. Dates, conversations, text messages, incidents. I nodded. Then she asked another question. Does your daughter have access to your accounts? No. House documents? I don't think so. Spare keys to your file cabinet? No. She smiled slightly. Good. I finally asked the question that scared me. Can they force me into assisted living? Susan answered immediately. No. Even if they say, I'm confused. You are sitting here independently. Yes. You drove yourself. Yes. You manage your finances. Yes. You understand your legal affairs. Yes. She folded her hands. Then no. I nearly cried. For weeks, I had begun doubting myself. That is what happens when people repeat something often enough. You begin to wonder, maybe I forgot something. Maybe I am getting older. Maybe they know better. But sitting in that office, I felt like Linda Parker again. Not an old woman. Not a burden. Not a problem. A person. Before I left, Susan handed me a folder. Take copies of everything. I looked at her. What if things get worse? She answered quietly. Then remember, this house is yours. I drove home slowly. For the first time, I noticed something. The fear inside me had started changing. It was becoming anger. Healthy anger. The kind that says enough. When I arrived home, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table. How was your appointment? Fine. What did the doctor say? I looked at her. He said I'm perfectly healthy. She smiled. That's good. I wondered if she believed me. That evening, Sophie asked me to help with homework. We sat together for nearly an hour. She looked up. Grandma? Yes. Are you moving away? My heart nearly stopped. What? She lowered her voice. I heard Mom talking. What did she say? Sophie hesitated. She said maybe you would be happier somewhere else. I felt cold. Children hear everything, even when adults think they don't. That night, after everyone went to bed, I opened the folder Susan had given me. The deed sat on top. My name, Linda Marie Parker. Owner. I touched the paper. For weeks, I had been living like a guest, but legally, emotionally, morally, this was still my home. I opened a notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote, March 14th, Emily took my keys. March 28th, locked outside in the rain. April 2nd, heard discussion about assisted living. April 5th, neighbor told me Emily mentioned memory problems. I continued writing. Every incident, every conversation, every detail. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Emily stood in the hallway. What are you doing? I closed the notebook. Writing? She smiled. About what? I looked directly at her. So I don't forget. She stared at me for several seconds. Then she quietly returned to her room. For the first time in months, I saw uncertainty in her face. Maybe she realized something had changed. Maybe she understood that I was no longer apologizing. Or maybe she sensed that the woman she believed was weak had started remembering exactly who she was. And I had only just begun. After meeting Susan, I stopped acting like a frightened woman. I became an observer. I watched. I listened. And I wrote everything down. For years, I had ignored small things because I wanted peace. Now I realized peace had cost me my voice. Every morning, I carried a small notebook in my purse. Every evening, I added details, dates, comments, conversations. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Susan had told me something important. Facts speak louder than emotions. So I began collecting facts. The first one came 3 days later. I returned from grocery shopping and found Emily standing near my desk. She quickly closed a drawer. I stopped. What are you doing? She smiled. Nothing. I looked at the desk. Were you looking for something? No. She walked away. After dinner, I checked the drawer. My insurance folder had been moved. The papers inside were out of order. I wrote the date down. Nothing more. No argument. No accusation. Just a fact. A few days later, I received a phone call from my bank. The woman asked, Mrs. Parker, did you authorize your daughter to discuss your accounts? My heart raced. No. She apologized. She had some questions. What questions? She asked about beneficiary information. I thanked her and hung up. Then I wrote another note. Emily contacted bank regarding accounts. No authorization given. That evening, I watched Emily help Sophie with homework. She laughed. She smiled. She looked like my daughter again. For a moment, I questioned myself. Maybe I was imagining everything. Maybe Susan had made me suspicious. Then Emily looked at Sophie and said, Grandma gets confused sometimes. The room became silent. Sophie looked at me. I looked at Emily. She didn't even notice what she had said. It had become normal for her. That frightened me more than anything. The next morning, I bought a small digital recorder. I never planned to trap anyone. I simply wanted to remember conversations correctly, because apparently memory had become the center of everything. One afternoon, Carol invited me for coffee. She lived 2 houses away. As we sat on her patio, she spoke carefully. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." She hesitated. "A few weeks ago, Emily asked me something." My stomach tightened. "What?" "She asked if I'd noticed you becoming forgetful." I looked down. "What did you say?" Carol answered immediately. I told her absolutely not. I felt tears forming. She touched my hand. "Linda, I know what you're going through." Her husband had passed away years earlier. She understood loneliness. She understood aging. Most importantly, she understood how easily older women become invisible. She looked directly at me. "You need witnesses." "What?" "People who know the truth." I thought about that all night. Witnesses. Not because I planned a fight, because I wanted reality. If people heard one story long enough, they would eventually believe it. A week later, the doorbell camera captured something unexpected. I had forgotten the camera even existed. Robert installed it years earlier. So one evening, I reviewed several recordings, and there it was, the rainy night. Me standing outside with grocery bags, knocking, waiting, standing in the rain. Nearly 7 minutes passed before Emily opened the door. I watched the video twice, then 3 times, for weeks. I had wondered if I had exaggerated. The camera didn't exaggerate. Facts. Again, I saved the recording. That same week, another incident happened. My sister Diane visited for lunch. Emily joined us at the table. At first, the conversation was pleasant. Then Diane asked, "Linda, are you still driving to church every Sunday?" Before I could answer, Emily spoke. "We're keeping an eye on that." Diane looked confused. "What do you mean?" Emily smiled. "Mom forgets things sometimes." I answered immediately. "No, I don't." Emily laughed. "Everyone forgets things." Diane looked directly at me. "Linda drove herself here last week." Emily became quiet. The room suddenly felt uncomfortable. After Diane left, Emily came into my room. "Why are you making me look bad?" I stared at her. I answered a question. "You embarrassed me." I could not believe what I heard. "You told my sister I forget things." She folded her arms. "I'm trying to help." I opened my notebook later that evening. I wrote down every word. Something else began changing. Mark became nervous around me. When I entered the room, conversation stopped. Papers disappeared. Phones turned over. One Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen. Mark was speaking quietly. When he saw me, he ended the call. "Morning." "Morning." His face looked pale. For the first time, I wondered if he knew exactly what Emily was doing. Or perhaps he was helping. That afternoon, Sophie sat beside me on the porch. She loved drawing. She carried a notebook everywhere. "Grandma." "Yes." "Are you mad at Mom?" I smiled. "No. Mom cries sometimes." That surprised me. "Why?" Sophie shrugged. "She says you're being difficult." Difficult. The same word again. Not hurt. Not lonely. Not sad, difficult, as if defending myself had become selfish. A few days later, I decided to check something. I opened the cabinet near the front door. The key basket was still empty, but inside another drawer, I found something. A new set of house keys. 3 copies. I held them in my hand. My daughter had taken my keys. Then she made new ones. Without telling me, I quietly returned them to the drawer. Another fact, another note. The following Sunday, after church, Nancy pulled me aside. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." She lowered her voice. "Emily said you've been thinking about moving." I stared at her. "No." She said maybe assisted living. I suddenly felt cold. The story was spreading. Neighbors, friends, church members, everyone was hearing the same thing. Except me. That evening, I sat in Robert's chair in the basement, the same chair Emily had moved downstairs. I looked around. Boxes, old decorations, dust. My husband's chair, my memories, my life, hidden away. And suddenly, I understood something. Emily thought I was weak because I stayed quiet. She thought silence meant agreement. She thought kindness meant surrender. But the notebook was growing. The recordings were saved. The witnesses existed. And for the first time in months, I realized something important. I wasn't losing my memory. I was recovering it. Every fact I wrote down reminded me who I was. And someday, very soon, my daughter was going to discover that I had been paying much closer attention than she ever imagined. 2 weeks after I started writing everything down, Emily announced a family dinner. She seemed unusually cheerful. "We should have everyone over." I looked up from my coffee. "Everyone. Aunt Diane, Uncle Steve, Cousin Rachel." She smiled. "It's been too long." Something felt strange. For nearly a year, Emily had avoided large family gatherings. Now suddenly, she wanted one. Mark seemed excited too. "We need some family time." I said nothing. But that night, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. "Emily planning family dinner. Reason unknown." The following Saturday, the house became busy. Emily cleaned every room. She bought flowers. She cooked all day. Mark grilled outside. To anyone watching, we looked like a happy family. I watched carefully. Emily moved around the kitchen like the owner of the house. She gave instructions. She organized everything. She even told me where to sit. "Mom, why don't you stay in the dining room?" I looked at her. "This is my kitchen." She forced a smile. I know. I knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to control the evening. By 4 o'clock, everyone arrived. Diane hugged me. Steve brought dessert. Rachel brought flowers. Sophie ran around laughing. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then dinner began. Emily sat at the head of the table. My seat. Robert's old seat beside me remained empty. I watched quietly. The conversation started easily. Work, weather, school, vacation plans. Then Emily changed the subject. "Mom has been having a difficult year." The room became quiet. I looked at her. She smiled gently. She's been under a lot of stress. Diane frowned. What kind of stress? Emily sighed. Aging can be hard. I felt my stomach tighten. Mark lowered his eyes. Rachel looked uncomfortable. Emily continued. We've been helping her a lot. Helping? That word again. I reached for my water. Emily kept talking. Sometimes Mom gets overwhelmed. Nobody spoke. I looked around the table. People seemed confused, uncertain. Emily looked like a caring daughter. Concerned, patient, loving. And suddenly I understood. This dinner wasn't about family. It was about witnesses. She wanted everyone to see her version. The devoted daughter, the struggling caregiver, the aging mother. Diane finally asked, Linda, how are you feeling? Before I could answer, Emily spoke. Some days are better than others. I slowly put down my fork. I can answer. The room became silent. Emily looked surprised. I smiled. I'm doing very well. Nobody spoke. I continued eating. Emily laughed softly. Mom doesn't always like asking for help. I looked directly at her. What help? Her face changed slightly. You know, daily things. Like what? She hesitated. Mark suddenly spoke. We all help each other. Smart answer. Very safe. The conversation moved on, but I could feel something. Emily wanted me to play a role, and I wasn't cooperating. After dinner, everyone gathered in the living room. Sophie played with her cousins. The television remained off. The atmosphere felt tense. Then Rachel asked me, Are you still driving yourself? Before I answered, Diane spoke. Of course she is. Emily smiled politely. We've been discussing future plans. I looked at her. What future plans? She folded her hands. Eventually, Mom may want something easier. Diane frowned. What does that mean? Emily took a deep breath. Maybe senior living someday. The room became completely silent. I could hear the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Nobody looked comfortable. Finally, Uncle Steve asked, Linda, do you want that? I looked directly at him. No, Emily quickly answered. Mom doesn't always like discussing difficult topics. That sentence changed everything. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I suddenly realized something. Emily expected me to stay quiet. For years, I had. She believed I always would. I looked around the room. My family, my sister, my friends, people who had known me for decades. And I made a decision. Not a fight, not an argument, simply truth. I said calmly, 2 weeks ago, I was locked outside my own house in the rain. The room froze. Emily looked at me. What? I continued. My keys were taken. Diane stared. What? Emily immediately answered. Mom, that's not what happened. I looked at her. Really? Mark shifted uncomfortably. Emily laughed nervously. Mom is upset about the key situation, I asked quietly. Did you take my house keys? No answer. Did you tell neighbors I forget things? Emily crossed her arms. We worry about you. I nodded. Did you tell church friends I might move away? She looked at the floor. Mwah. Nobody spoke. For the first time all evening, people weren't looking at me. They were looking at Emily. And she didn't like it. She stood up. You're making me sound terrible, I answered softly. I'm only telling the truth. The room felt heavy. Diane finally spoke. Emily, did you really take her keys? Emily looked frustrated. We were trying to help, Rachel asked quietly. Did Linda ask for help? No answer. Mark finally stood up. Everybody's misunderstanding. I looked at him. Was I misunderstanding when I stood outside in the rain? Silence. The silence became the loudest sound in the room. Nobody shouted. Nobody argued. That was the strange part. The truth didn't need shouting. People simply began seeing things differently. A little later, Diane joined me in the kitchen. She whispered, Why didn't you tell me? I smiled sadly. I was embarrassed. She held my hand. You have nothing to be embarrassed about. Meanwhile, Emily sat quietly in the living room. Nobody asked her questions anymore. Nobody praised her. Nobody called her devoted. For the first time, the story she had built began to crack. When everyone finally left, the house became quiet. Emily entered the kitchen. Her eyes were red. You humiliated me. I looked at her. No. Everyone thinks I'm a monster. You told them your version. She stared at me. I've done everything for you. I answered softly. Did I ask you to? She had no answer. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom. For months, I had been afraid of conflict, afraid of losing my daughter, afraid people would not believe me. But tonight, something changed. People had listened. Not because I attacked Emily, because I finally spoke. And downstairs, my daughter was discovering something she never expected. The quiet woman she believed she controlled had finally found her voice. The morning after the family dinner, the house felt different. Nobody spoke during breakfast. Mark drank coffee. Emily looked at her phone. Sophie quietly ate cereal. For the first time in months, I did not feel nervous. Something had changed. The truth had entered the room. And once truth enters a family, it becomes difficult to remove. Around 9 o'clock, Emily finally spoke. I can't believe you did that. I looked up. Did what? You embarrassed me in front of everyone? I folded my napkin. I answered questions. She shook her head. You made me look cruel. I looked directly at her. I never said you were cruel. She stood up. You knew exactly what you were doing. I stayed calm. Because Susan had taught me something. Emotion loses arguments. Facts win them. I simply said, Did you take my keys? Emily said nothing. Did you lock me outside? No answer. Did you tell people I was forgetful? She looked away. Mark finally spoke. Everyone needs to calm down. I stood up. No, everyone needs to be honest. The room became silent. For the first time, nobody told me to sit down. Nobody told me I was confused. Nobody spoke for me. That afternoon, I drove to the bank. Susan had recommended changing several passwords and updating account information. The manager greeted me. Mrs. Parker. I smiled. I need to review all account access. Within 30 minutes, everything was updated. Online passwords, security questions, emergency contacts, beneficiaries. Only my name remained. As I sat there signing papers, I realized something. For months, I had been afraid of losing control. The truth was that I had never actually lost it. I had simply stopped using it. After leaving the bank, I visited the insurance office. The same thing. Everything belonged to me. The car, the house insurance, the umbrella policy. Everything. I drove home feeling lighter, but I also knew something. Sooner or later, Emily would discover that I had started protecting myself. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with several folders. House documents, insurance papers, tax statements. Emily walked in. She looked surprised. What are you doing? I answered calmly. Reviewing my finances. She sat down. Why? Because I should. She looked at the papers. Is something wrong? I looked directly at her. No. She became uncomfortable. For months, she had asked the questions. Now I was giving very short answers. She finally said, You don't trust me. I answered honestly. I don't know if I do. Her eyes filled with tears. After everything I've done, I took a deep breath. What exactly have you done? She looked shocked. I've taken care of you. I slowly shook my head. I've paid every bill. Silence. I've paid the taxes. Silence. I've paid the insurance. Silence. I've paid for groceries. Silence. I've paid for this house for 38 years. She crossed her arms. So now you're keeping score? No. I looked at her calmly. I'm remembering. That word hit her. Remembering. For months, she had talked about forgetting. Now I was talking about remembering. Mark entered the kitchen. What's going on? Emily looked upset. Mom doesn't trust us. I looked at him. Do you trust me? He frowned. What does that mean? Do you trust me to make my own decisions? He hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. I stood up. I want something very clear. Neither of them spoke. This house belongs to me. Emily looked angry. We know that. Do you? She stared at me. The deed is in my name. Silence. The accounts are in my name. Silence. The insurance is in my name. Silence. The investments are in my name. Mark shifted uncomfortably. I continued. And nobody will make decisions for me. Emily's eyes became wet. You think we're stealing from you? I answered honestly. I think you're trying to control me. That sentence landed heavily. Nobody spoke. A few minutes later, Sophie walked into the kitchen. She immediately sensed tension. "What's wrong?" Emily wiped her eyes. "Nothing." Sophie looked at me. I smiled. "It's adult stuff." She nodded and walked away. After dinner, I went upstairs. About an hour later, I heard Emily and Mark arguing quietly. Their bedroom door was closed. "But the walls in old houses are thin," Emily whispered. "She's changing," Mark answered. "Because she talked to somebody." My heart began racing. Emily said, "What if she spoke to a lawyer?" Several seconds passed. Mark finally answered. "Then we have a problem." I sat completely still. A problem. Not a mother. Not family. A problem. The next morning, Emily knocked on my bedroom door. She carried coffee, something she had not done in months. "Can we talk?" I nodded. She sat down. For a moment, she looked like my little girl again. "Mom, are you angry?" I thought carefully. "Yes." She lowered her eyes. "I was trying to help," I asked quietly. "By taking my keys." She didn't answer. "By telling people I forget things." Silence. "By discussing assisted living." Tears rolled down her face. I was scared. That surprised me. "Of what?" She looked up. "Losing everything." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" She took a deep breath. "Mark's job isn't enough." She began crying. "We have debt." There it was. Money. For months, nobody mentioned money. But suddenly it appeared. How much debt? She looked away. "I don't know exactly." I immediately understood. She knew. She simply didn't want to tell me. That afternoon, I drove to Susan's office again. I explained everything. She listened quietly. Then she said something important. "Linda, people under financial pressure sometimes make terrible decisions." I nodded. "Do you think that's happening?" She answered carefully. "I think you need clear boundaries." That evening, I made my decision. No more confusion. No more assumptions. No more silence. After dinner, I sat at the dining room table. Emily, Mark, me. I looked at both of them. "I need you to understand something." Neither spoke. "This house is mine." Emily looked down. "My finances are mine." Silence. "My decisions are mine." Silence. "And from this moment forward, nobody speaks for me," Mark finally said. "Nobody's trying to." I looked directly at him. "Good." I stood up, because something had finally changed. For months, they believed I was becoming weaker. The truth was exactly the opposite. Every document, every account, every policy, every decision, everything still carried one name: Linda Parker. And for the first time in a very long time, I had started acting like the owner of my own life again. After I reminded Emily that everything still belonged to me, the house became very quiet. Too quiet. Nobody argued. Nobody raised their voice. But something had changed. Emily stopped pretending. For months, she had spoken softly. She acted concerned. She talked about helping me. Now the mask began to disappear. The first sign came 3 days later. I returned from church and found Emily sitting alone in the kitchen. Her eyes were red. She looked exhausted. The moment I walked in, she began crying. Real tears. Not anger. Not frustration. Tears. "Mom, why are you doing this to us?" I placed my purse on the counter. "What am I doing?" She wiped her eyes. "You've changed." I almost laughed. No, I had not changed. I had simply stopped surrendering. Emily continued. "We came here because we needed help." "You still have help." She shook her head. "You don't trust us anymore." I sat down. "Why should I?" She looked shocked. "I'm your daughter." "And I'm your mother." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said something I never expected. "If you force us out, Sophie will suffer." The room became very quiet. There it was. Guilt. A mother's favorite weapon. I looked at her carefully. "I'm not forcing anyone out. You know we can't afford another place." I said nothing, because for the first time, I realized something. Emily had stopped seeing me as her mother. I had become a solution. A house, money, security. She began crying harder. "You want us homeless?" "No." "You want Sophie to suffer?" "No." "Then why are you doing this?" I took a deep breath. "Because I want my life back." She stared at me. "My life matters too." Emily suddenly stood up. "So your life matters more than your family." That sentence hit me hard, because mothers hear it often. If you say no, you're selfish. If you set boundaries, you're cruel. If you protect yourself, you're abandoning someone. I answered quietly. My life matters too. Emily left the room. That evening, Mark spoke to me privately. We sat outside on the porch. He looked tired, older, worried. "Emily's scared." "So am I." He nodded. "We didn't expect this." I looked at him. "Expect what?" He hesitated. "You changing." Again, the same word. Changing. I finally asked the question. "How much debt do you have?" His face changed immediately. He looked away. "Some." "How much?" He didn't answer. That silence told me more than any number. The next morning, Sophie entered my room. She climbed onto the bed. "Grandma." "Yes." "Sweetheart, are you mad at Mommy?" I smiled. "No. Mommy cried last night. My heart hurt." "Did she?" Sophie nodded. "She said you don't love her anymore." I closed my eyes, because that was cruel. Very cruel. Using a child. Using fear. Using guilt. I gently held Sophie's hand. "I love your mother very much." Then why is she sad? I thought carefully. Sometimes adults make mistakes. She nodded slowly. Then she asked the question that broke my heart. Are you going away? I immediately answered. No. She smiled. Good. I kissed her forehead. After she left, I sat quietly. Emily had spent months telling people that I was confused. Now she was telling her daughter that I was leaving. That afternoon, I overheard another conversation. Emily was speaking to Mark. We can't lose this house. This house. Not Mom's house. Not Linda's house. This house. Mark answered quietly. We don't own it. Emily became angry. We've lived here for 2 years. Mark said nothing. She continued. We've done everything. I almost walked away. Then I heard something else. What about Sophie? Mark answered. Don't use her. Silence. Emily began crying. We have nowhere else to go. For the first time, I felt sympathy. Real sympathy. Because beneath the anger was fear. Financial fear. Failure. Embarrassment. Emily was scared. But fear does not justify cruelty. Fear does not give someone the right to take your keys. That evening, something unexpected happened. Sophie sat at the dining room table drawing pictures. I sat beside her. She looked nervous. Grandma. Yes. She lowered her voice. Mom told me not to say something. My stomach tightened. What? She looked around. Mom said if we leave, I won't see you anymore. I felt my heart break. What did you say? She looked down. I cried. Children tell the truth. They don't know how to manipulate. They simply repeat what they hear. At that moment, I realized something. Emily was no longer fighting me. She was fighting fear. And fear makes people desperate. Later that night, Emily entered my bedroom. She closed the door. Her face looked tired. She sat in the chair beside my bed for a long time. Neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, I don't know what to do. For a moment, she sounded like my little girl again. Not the woman who took my keys. Not the woman who locked me outside. Just my daughter. I asked softly. How much debt? Tears appeared. A lot. How much? She whispered the number. Almost $80,000. My chest tightened. Credit cards. Medical bills. Loans. Missed payments. I finally understood. Everything. The fear. The pressure. The control. The discussions. She wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to save herself. She looked at me. If we lose this house, we're finished. I answered quietly. You were never supposed to have this house. She began crying again. What am I supposed to do? I looked at my daughter, the little girl Robert carried on his shoulders, the teenager who cried after her first heartbreak, the woman sitting in front of me, broken, afraid, but also responsible for the pain she caused. I said softly, tell me the truth. She wiped her eyes. Everything. Everything. She looked terrified, and at that moment, I realized the biggest secret had still not been revealed. The debt, the lies, the missing keys. None of those were the whole story. Something larger was still hidden. And my daughter was finally too exhausted to keep hiding it. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For the first time in months, I slept well. Not because my problems had disappeared, because the truth had finally started coming out. Emily had admitted the debt. She had admitted they were afraid. But she still had not told me everything. I made coffee and sat alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet. Robert used to say something. Problems don't disappear. They only wait. I understood that now. Around 7 o'clock, Mark entered the kitchen. He looked exhausted. He poured coffee and sat across from me. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Emily didn't sleep." I nodded. Neither did I. He looked down at his cup. "We made mistakes." I waited. He took a deep breath. "We thought we had more time." More time for what? He didn't answer. That frightened me, because people avoid answers when the truth hurts. Later that morning, I called Susan. I explained everything. The debt, the conversations, the pressure. She listened carefully. Then she asked one question. "Linda, what do you want?" Nobody had asked me that. Not Emily, not Mark, not anyone. What did I want? I thought about it. The answer surprised me. "I want my home back." Susan spoke gently. "Then you need clear boundaries." She explained the process. Written notice, reasonable time. No arguments. No anger. Just facts. When the call ended, I sat quietly. The decision had finally arrived. Either I continued living as a guest, or I became the owner again. That afternoon, I opened my desk drawer. Inside was a folder. House deed, tax documents, insurance, property records, everything. I placed them on the dining room table. Then I waited. Emily came downstairs first. She stopped. "What's this?" "Documents." Mark appeared a few minutes later. The room suddenly felt very small. I looked at both of them. "We need to talk." Emily sat down. Her face looked nervous. Mark remained standing. I spoke calmly. "This house belongs to me." Nobody answered. "I've spent months avoiding this conversation." Emily lowered her eyes. "But I can't avoid it anymore," she whispered. "Mom," I continued, "I need my home back." Silence. Mark slowly sat down. Emily began crying. "What are you saying?" I looked directly at her. "I'm asking you to find another place to live." The room became completely silent. Sophie was at school. The television was off. Even the clock seemed quiet. Emily finally spoke. "You're throwing us out." "No. What else do you call this?" I took a deep breath. I've supported you for almost 2 years. Tears rolled down her face. We don't have enough money. I nodded. I know. She looked shocked. You know, you told me. She buried her face in her hands. Mark finally spoke. We need time. How much? Neither answered. That worried me, because people without plans usually expect someone else to save them. Emily looked up. You would really do this? I answered honestly. I don't want to. Then don't. I shook my head. I can't live this way anymore. She stood up suddenly. So that's it? No. You choose a house over your daughter. That sentence cut deeply. But this time, I was prepared. I am choosing myself. She looked at me as if she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. The old Linda apologized. The old Linda stayed quiet. The old Linda stood in the rain. That woman was gone. Emily left the room. A few minutes later, I heard her crying upstairs. Mark remained seated. For several moments, he said nothing. Then he surprised me. You're right. I looked at him. He rubbed his face. We stayed too long. I wasn't expecting that. He continued. We should have left last year. Why didn't you? He looked exhausted. Because we couldn't. I finally asked. How bad is it? He looked directly at me. Worse than Emily told you. My stomach tightened. He stood up. I'll show you. That evening, he brought several folders. Bills, collection notices, credit cards, medical debt, loan statements, late notices. I looked at the numbers. My chest became tight. Over $90,000. I understood Emily's fear. But then I saw something else. One envelope. My address. My house. I looked up. What is this? Mark became pale. Emily entered the room. She saw the envelope. Her face changed. I opened it. Loan information. My address. My property. I slowly looked at them. What is this? Nobody spoke. I asked again. Why is my address on this application? Mark looked down. Emily started crying. We didn't mean to. The room became cold. I suddenly realized why Mark looked terrified. I opened another document. Again, my address. My property, not ownership, but residence. Financial documents connected to my house. I looked at Mark. Did you use my address? He nodded. For what? Loans. My hands began shaking. Without telling me. Emily started crying harder. We had no choice. I stood up. No choice? Mark finally spoke. We needed approval. I felt sick. For months, I thought the fight was about control. It wasn't. It was survival. Financial survival. And my house had become part of their solution. I walked upstairs. I couldn't breathe. Robert's photograph sat beside my bed. I looked at him. Everything suddenly made sense. The discussions about assisted living, the memory problems, the neighbors, the keys, the control. If I moved, if I left, what happened to the house? The question terrified me. An hour later, there was a knock. Mark stood outside my door. I never wanted this. I looked at him. Then why? His eyes filled with tears. I was drowning. For the first time, I believed him. Not because he was innocent, because he was broken. But broken people can still hurt others. And that night, as I sat alone in my bedroom, I realized something. My daughter and son-in-law had not only stayed too long, they had built their future around a house that never belonged to them. And now I understood why they were so afraid to leave. Because leaving meant facing the truth. Without my house, they had nothing left to stand on. I barely slept after finding those loan documents. For hours. I sat in my bedroom holding the papers, my address, my house, my home, used on financial applications I knew nothing about. I kept asking myself one question. How far had this gone the next morning? I called Susan. My voice was shaking. I found something. She listened carefully. Then she said, "Bring everything." I drove to her office immediately. The folders sat beside me on the passenger seat. Mark had given me several documents. But now I wondered whether those were only the papers he wanted me to see. Susan spread everything across the conference table. She examined each page. Loan applications, credit statements, collection notices, past due accounts. Then she stopped. She pointed at one form. "This concerns me." I looked down. My address appeared again. "What does it mean?" She spoke carefully. "They use this property as their primary residence for financial applications. Is that illegal?" "Not necessarily, but..." She looked at me. If lenders believed they had some ownership interest, it becomes more complicated. My heart started racing. "Do they..." She shook her head. "No. Could they claim they do..." She paused. "People claim many things." I sat quietly. Susan continued. "Have they ever paid the mortgage?" "There is no mortgage." "Property taxes?" "No." "Insurance?" "No." "Major repairs?" "No." She nodded. "Then ownership is clear." I finally asked the question. "Could they force me to sell?" Her answer came immediately. "No." For the first time all morning, I breathed, but Susan wasn't finished. "Linda, you need boundaries now." "What kind?" She opened a drawer. Formal occupancy notice, reasonable departure period, written communication, everything documented. I looked at the papers. This suddenly felt real. Very real. I wasn't simply arguing with my daughter. I was reclaiming my home. When I returned home, the house felt unusually quiet. Emily was sitting alone in the living room. Her eyes were swollen. She looked exhausted. "Where did you go?" I answered honestly. "To my attorney." Her face became pale. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, You really did. Yes. She lowered her eyes. Why? I looked around the room, my furniture, my house. Because I had to. She started crying. We're your family. I nodded. You are. Families don't do this. I looked at her carefully. Families don't take keys. She looked away. Families don't tell neighbors their mother is losing her memory. More tears. Families don't lock mothers outside in the rain. She covered her face. For months, Emily had controlled the conversation. Now the facts controlled it. Mark came home later that afternoon. Emily immediately told him. She hired a lawyer. He looked tired. Not angry, just tired. He sat down. Maybe it's time. Emily stared at him. What? He rubbed his eyes. We can't keep doing this. She stood up. So you give up? He looked directly at her. We lost our apartment. Silence. We lost our savings. Silence. We lost our credit. Silence. I don't want us to lose your mother, too. That sentence hit the room like thunder. Emily began crying again. But this time, Mark continued. You've been fighting her for months. I was trying to help. No. He looked at her. You were trying to survive. She stared at him. So were you. He nodded. Yes. At least he was honest. That evening, I sat with Sophie on the porch. She was drawing. The sun was setting. Everything felt strangely peaceful. Grandma? Yes. Are we moving? I smiled gently. Probably. She looked sad. Will I still see you? I touched her hand. Always. She nodded. Then she said something that broke my heart. I don't like when Mom cries. Neither did I. But tears cannot erase actions. Later that night, Emily knocked on my bedroom door. She looked exhausted. I want to tell you everything. I sat down. She sat across from me. For the first time in months, she looked like my daughter again. Not the woman who controlled me. Not the woman who took my keys. Just Emily. She spoke quietly. It started with Mark's layoff. I listened. The credit cards grew. The loans grew. The medical bills grew. We thought it would improve. It didn't. Then came missed payments, collections, more debt. She looked down. I became scared. I asked softly, when did you start thinking about the house? She closed her eyes. A year ago. My heart sank. She continued. I thought maybe eventually. She couldn't finish. Eventually what? She whispered. You might move somewhere smaller. The room became silent. There it was. The truth. Not evil. Not a conspiracy. Something worse. Entitlement. She had started imagining a future that belonged to her. Without asking me. Without telling me. She looked up. I never planned to hurt you. But you did. She nodded. Tears rolled down her face. I know. I asked another question. Why tell people I was forgetful? She looked ashamed. Because I thought if people understood. Understood what? She finally said it. That you needed help. Needed help. Those words hurt. Because she had slowly created a version of me that did not exist. A confused woman. A vulnerable woman. A woman who needed others to decide. I looked directly at her. I was never the problem. She began crying harder. I know. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said the words I had avoided. You need to move. She closed her eyes. I know. That answer surprised me. No argument, no anger, just exhaustion. The next morning, I placed the written notice on the kitchen table. 30 days? Legal? Clear? Respectful. Mark signed that he received it. Emily stared at the paper. She looked broken, but something else was changing. The fighting had stopped. The lies had stopped. Only truth remained. That afternoon, I walked through my house, the living room, the kitchen, the dining room, the hallway. I imagined Robert beside me. I imagined his voice. Protect the home. Protect yourself. Protect your peace. For months, I thought reclaiming my house meant winning. Now I understood something different. Nobody wins when families break. But sometimes, boundaries are the only thing that can save what remains. And upstairs, my daughter was packing boxes. For the first time in 2 years, she finally understood. The house had never been hers, and neither had my life. The first box appeared in the hallway on Monday morning. It belonged to Sophie. A small cardboard box filled with books, crayons, and stuffed animals. I stood there looking at it for several seconds. After 2 years, the moving had finally begun. The house felt different. Not angry, not tense, just sad. Emily barely spoke. Mark spent hours making phone calls. Sophie asked questions nobody wanted to answer. And I walked through my own home, feeling both relieved and heartbroken. That afternoon, Mark approached me. We found an apartment. I looked up. Where? 20 minutes away. I nodded. When? He swallowed. 3 weeks. For some reason, hearing an actual date made everything real. 3 weeks. After 2 years. 3 weeks. Emily overheard the conversation. She quietly walked upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard her crying. I didn't follow her. Some pain belongs to the person who created it. The following morning, I found Sophie sitting alone at the kitchen table. She looked sad. What's wrong? She lowered her eyes. I don't want to leave. I sat beside her. I know. Can we stay here? My heart hurt. Because children always ask the hardest questions. I took her hand. This is Grandma's home. She nodded. Our new apartment will be small. I smiled. But you'll still have your room. She looked at me. Will you visit every week? She finally smiled. That smile saved me. Later that afternoon, Emily entered my bedroom. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes. She sat quietly for a long time. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "I hate you." The words surprised me, but they also sounded honest. I looked at her. "No, you don't." Tears filled her eyes. "My whole life is falling apart." I nodded. "I know. You don't understand." I took a deep breath. "Your father died in this house." She looked at me. "I buried my husband." Silence. "I learned how to sleep alone." Silence. "I learned how to eat alone." Silence. "I survived losing the love of my life." Tears rolled down her face. I continued. "And then I almost lost my daughter while she was still alive." She started crying. Real crying. Not anger. Not guilt. Pain. I was scared. I know. I didn't know what to do. I looked at her carefully. "Then you should have asked me." That sentence changed something, because it was true. She never asked. Not for help. Not for money. Not for advice. She simply started making decisions about my life. She whispered, "I thought you'd say no." I smiled sadly. "You never gave me the chance to say yes." For the first time in months, we cried together. Not as enemies, not as opponents. Mother and daughter, broken, but honest. That evening, Mark knocked on my bedroom door. He looked uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology." I nodded. He sat down. I knew Emily was wrong. I remained silent. I knew taking the keys was wrong. Silence. I knew talking about assisted living was wrong. He looked down. "But I was afraid," I asked quietly. "Afraid of what?" "Failure." His voice cracked. "I lost my job. I lost our savings. I couldn't take care of my family." Tears appeared. "I thought if we could stay here long enough, everything would get better." I finally understood him. Not excuse. Understand. Fear had controlled him, just as fear had controlled Emily. The difference was that fear had made them forget who I was. The next weekend, Diane came over. She brought lunch. As we sat in the kitchen, she asked, "How are you?" I thought carefully. "Sad." "Only sad." I smiled. "And relieved." She nodded. "That's allowed." Emily joined us later. For the first time in months. The conversation felt normal. Nobody talked about memory. Nobody talked about assisted living. Nobody talked about concern. Only truth remained. The following Tuesday, something unexpected happened. Emily handed me my old key, the original front door key, the same key she had taken months earlier. She placed it in my hand. I found it. I looked down at the small piece of metal. The key that started everything. The key that represented everything. Control, respect, ownership, trust. Emily looked at me. I'm sorry. For several seconds, I couldn't speak, because this wasn't about a key. It never was. I finally asked, "Why did you take it?" She lowered her eyes. "I think I want it to feel safe." I nodded. "But you made me feel unsafe." She started crying again. I know. I closed my fingers around the key. For the first time in months, it belonged in my hand again. 3 days before the move, Sophie asked me something. "Grandma." "Yes." "If Mommy says sorry, are you still family?" My eyes filled with tears. "Always?" She smiled. Good. Children understand forgiveness better than adults. The night before they moved, the 4 of us sat together for dinner. No television, no arguments, no tension, just quiet. Emily looked around the room. Her eyes stopped on the walls, the photographs, the furniture, the memories. She whispered, "I forgot this wasn't my house." I looked at her. No. She looked up. "You forgot it was your mother's house." Tears rolled down her face. Because that was the truth. Not ownership, relationship. She forgot who I was. And I had almost forgotten too. That night, before going to bed, I walked to the front door. I unlocked it, then locked it again. The key felt heavy in my hand. The same key, the same house. But I was no longer the same woman. Because sometimes losing something teaches you exactly how valuable it was. And tomorrow, my daughter would leave. But for the first time in 2 years, I believed that perhaps one day she might finally come back. Not as the owner, not as the caretaker, simply as my daughter. The moving truck arrived on a gray Thursday morning. I stood at the front window and watched it pull into the driveway. For 2 years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would feel victorious. Instead, I felt tired, very tired. Mark stepped outside first. He spoke quietly to the movers. Emily stayed upstairs. Sophie sat beside me on the couch. Neither of us said much. Children understand endings better than adults. They simply feel them. Around 9 o'clock, Mark began carrying boxes. Kitchen boxes, bedroom boxes, clothes, books, pictures. Every trip to the truck felt like another chapter closing. I watched from the dining room, the same room where Emily had once sat as a little girl doing homework. The same room where Robert carved Thanksgiving turkey. The same room where my family had almost fallen apart. After an hour, Emily finally came downstairs. Her eyes were red. She carried a small box. Inside were family photographs. The pictures she had removed from my walls months earlier. She placed them on the table. I found these in the garage. I looked at the photographs. Robert holding Emily at 5 years old. Christmas mornings. Graduations. Vacations. Memories. Emily looked ashamed. I'm sorry. I gently touched one picture. Why did you put them away? She sat down. They made me feel guilty. I looked at her. Why? Because this wasn't our house. The truth had finally arrived. Simple, painful, honest. She continued. Every time I looked at your life with Dad, I felt like an outsider. I had never considered that. To me, those photographs represented love. To her, they represented ownership, history, a life that existed before her problems. She whispered, I think I wanted to erase things. I nodded slowly. Instead, you erased me. Tears rolled down her face. I know. Outside, the movers continued loading boxes. Inside, two women finally spoke honestly. No pretending, no excuses, just truth. Later that morning, Mark entered carrying a small wooden box. My heart immediately recognized it. Robert's belongings. His watch. His wallet. His military photographs. His wedding ring. Mark placed the box in front of me. I found this in our closet. I looked at him. Our closet. His face changed. He immediately understood. He lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. That one sentence carried 2 years of guilt, because he finally realized something. There had never been an hour. Not the bedroom, not the house, not the future they imagined. Only borrowed time. Around noon, Sophie ran into my room. She looked frightened. Grandma, what is it? I don't want to go. I sat beside her. You'll be okay. She started crying. What if everything changes? I hugged her. Everything always changes. She buried her face against my shoulder. I don't want you to be alone. Those words nearly broke me, because after all the pain, all the fighting, all the lies, this little girl still worried about me. I smiled. I was alone before. She looked up. Were you sad? I thought about Robert. The quiet house, the empty chair, the silence. Sometimes, she touched my hand. You won't be alone. I kissed her forehead. No, I won't. Because for the first time, I believed it. That afternoon, Diane arrived. She helped organize the remaining boxes. Emily avoided her at first. Eventually, Diane approached her. I watched from the kitchen. They spoke quietly. Then Emily began crying again. Diane hugged her. Family. Even after disappointment. Even after mistakes. Family. Around 3 o'clock. Mark walked through the house one final time. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. He stopped near the front door. I never thanked you. I looked at him. For what? For saving us? I almost laughed, because for months, they had believed I was the problem. Now they understood. Without me, they would have been homeless long ago. he continued. And I never respected what you gave us. I nodded. I know. He looked down. I hope someday you forgive me. I answered honestly. I already have. That surprised him. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It simply means choosing peace. Late in the afternoon, only one room remained. Sophie's room, the old office Robert once used. She walked through it slowly. She touched the walls, the bookshelf, the window. Then she turned toward me. Can I keep the key? I smiled. What key? She held up the small bedroom key. I nodded. Of course. She smiled. My room key. I looked at her carefully. No. She frowned. What? I gently touched her shoulder. It was always your room. Children understand things adults often forget. Ownership matters. Respect matters. Names matter. As the sun began setting, the truck was finally loaded. Emily stood near the front door, the same front door where she had once kept me standing in the rain. She looked at the lock, the handle, the key. Then she looked at me. I took this house away from you, I answered quietly. No. She looked confused. You tried. Tears filled her eyes. But you couldn't. She nodded, because now she understood. A house is not only wood, not walls, not doors. A home belongs to the person who protects it. And I had finally protected mine. Before leaving, Emily reached into her purse. She handed me 3 keys, the copies she had made. Garage, back door, front door, all of them. I held them in my hand. Months ago, losing one key had nearly broken me. Today, getting them back felt strangely unimportant, because the real thing I had recovered wasn't metal. It was myself. Sophie hugged me tightly. I love you, Grandma. I love you too. Mark shook my hand. Emily stood in front of me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, Can I still come home? I looked at her, the frightened woman, the exhausted daughter, the little girl I once carried. I answered softly, When you come as my daughter. She cried, and for the first time in 2 years, she hugged me like a daughter again, not an owner, not a caretaker, not a victim, simply my child. As the truck disappeared down the street, I stood alone on the porch. The evening was quiet. The house was quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like peace. The moving truck arrived on a gray Thursday morning. I stood at the front window and watched it pull into the driveway. For 2 years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would feel victorious. Instead, I felt tired, very tired. Mark stepped outside first. He spoke quietly to the movers. Emily stayed upstairs. Sophie sat beside me on the couch. Neither of us said much. Children understand endings better than adults. They simply feel them. Around 9 o'clock, Mark began carrying boxes, kitchen boxes, bedroom boxes, clothes, books. pictures. Every trip to the truck felt like another chapter closing. I watched from the dining room, the same room where Emily had once sat as a little girl doing homework. The same room where Robert carved Thanksgiving turkey. The same room where my family had almost fallen apart. After an hour, Emily finally came downstairs. Her eyes were red. She carried a small box. Inside were family photographs, the pictures she had removed from my walls months earlier. She placed them on the table. "I found these in the garage." I looked at the photographs. Robert holding Emily at 5 years old. Christmas mornings. Graduations. Vacations. Memories. Emily looked ashamed. "I'm sorry." I gently touched one picture. "Why did you put them away?" She sat down. "They made me feel guilty." I looked at her. "Why?" "Because this wasn't our house." The truth had finally arrived. Simple, painful, honest. She continued. "Every time I looked at your life with Dad, I felt like an outsider. I had never considered that. To me, those photographs represented love. To her, they represented ownership, history, a life that existed before her problems." She whispered, "I think I wanted to erase things." I nodded slowly. "Instead, you erased me." Tears rolled down her face. "I know." Outside, the movers continued loading boxes. Inside, 2 women finally spoke honestly. No pretending, no excuses, just truth. Later that morning, Mark entered carrying a small wooden box. My heart immediately recognized it. Robert's belongings, his watch, his wallet, his military photographs, his wedding ring. Mark placed the box in front of me. "I found this in our closet." I looked at him. Our closet. His face changed. He immediately understood. He lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." That one sentence carried 2 years of guilt. Because he finally realized something. There had never been an hour. Not the bedroom, not the house, not the future they imagined. Only borrowed time. Around noon, Sophie ran into my room. She looked frightened. "Grandma." "What is it?" "I don't want to go." I sat beside her. "You'll be okay." She started crying. "What if everything changes?" I hugged her. "Everything always changes." She buried her face against my shoulder. "I don't want you to be alone." Those words nearly broke me. Because after all the pain, all the fighting, all the lies, this little girl still worried about me. I smiled. "I was alone before." She looked up. "Were you sad?" I thought about Robert, the quiet house, the empty chair, the silence. "Sometimes." She touched my hand. "You won't be alone." I kissed her forehead. "No, I won't." Because for the first time, I believed it. That afternoon, Diane arrived. She helped organize the remaining boxes. Emily avoided her at first. Eventually, Diane approached her. I watched from the kitchen. They spoke quietly. Then Emily began crying again. Diane hugged her. Family. Even after disappointment. Even after mistakes. Family. Around 3 o'clock, Mark walked through the house one final time. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. He stopped near the front door. I never thanked you. I looked at him. For what? For saving us. I almost laughed, because for months, they had believed I was the problem. Now they understood. Without me, they would have been homeless long ago. He continued. And I never respected what you gave us. I nodded. I know. He looked down. I hope someday you forgive me. I answered honestly. I already have. That surprised him. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It simply means choosing peace. Late in the afternoon, only one room remained. Sophie's room. The old office Robert once used. She walked through it slowly. She touched the walls, the bookshelf, the window. Then she turned toward me. Can I keep the key? I smiled. What key? She held up the small bedroom key. I nodded. Of course. She smiled. My room key. I looked at her carefully. No. She frowned. What? I gently touched her shoulder. It was always your room. Children understand things adults often forget. Ownership matters. Respect matters. Names matter. As the sun began setting, the truck was finally loaded. Emily stood near the front door, the same front door where she had once kept me standing in the rain. She looked at the lock, the handle, the key. Then she looked at me. I took this house away from you, I answered quietly. No. She looked confused. You tried. Tears filled her eyes. But you couldn't. She nodded, because now she understood. A house is not only wood, not walls, not doors. A home belongs to the person who protects it. And I had finally protected mine. Before leaving, Emily reached into her purse. She handed me 3 keys, the copies she had made. Garage, back door, front door. All of them. I held them in my hand. Months ago, losing one key had nearly broken me. Today, getting them back felt strangely unimportant, because the real thing I had recovered wasn't metal. It was myself. Sophie hugged me tightly. I love you. Grandma. I love you too. Mark shook my hand. Emily stood in front of me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, Can I still come home? I looked at her, the frightened woman, the exhausted daughter, the little girl I once carried. I answered softly, When you come as my daughter. She cried, and for the first time in 2 years, she hugged me like a daughter again. Not an owner, not a caretaker, not a victim, simply my child. As the truck disappeared down the street, I stood alone on the porch. The evening was quiet. The house was quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like peace. Word count 1113 words. Ketuk fan muy bon. Tiếp tục. Yêu cầu viết đủ 1.000 đến 1.200 từ theo quy định viết bằng tiếng Anh lưu ý. Ghi số từ ở cuối mọi phần. Lời thoại kiểu kể chuyện ngôi thứ nhất, lời kể ngắn gọn. Logic. Gây cần thu hút người xem. Fan 15. 3 weeks after Emily moved out, I finally heard the house breathe again. That may sound strange, but houses breathe. They remember. They hold silence. They carry grief. For 2 years, my home had been full of tension. Now, every room felt different. The first thing I did was move Robert's chair back upstairs. I placed it beside the window where it had always stood. When I sat down, sunlight touched the fabric. For a moment, I closed my eyes. I brought it home. I whispered. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. Every morning, I made coffee. I opened the curtains. I watered my flowers. I walked through my own kitchen without asking permission. Small things, ordinary things, but after losing them, they felt extraordinary. A month passed. Emily called occasionally. Our conversations were short, careful. Neither of us knew how to become mother and daughter again. Some wounds heal slowly. One afternoon, I received a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A handwritten letter. Emily's handwriting. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. The first sentence made me cry. Mom, I finally understand what I took from you. I continued reading. She wrote about fear, debt, shame, failure. She admitted that losing control of her own life made her try to control mine. She admitted that she had convinced herself she was helping me. She admitted that every time she removed something from the house, she felt safer. The chair, the pictures, the keys, the rules. She wrote, I was preparing for a future that belonged to me before you had even finished living your own life. I read those words 3 times because they were true. At the end of the letter, she asked one question. Can we meet? I waited 2 days before answering. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted clarity. Eventually, I called her. Hello? Her voice sounded nervous. Hi. Emily. Silence. Did you read it? Yes. Another silence. Would you like to meet? I looked out the window. The oak tree Robert planted moved gently in the wind. Yes. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop halfway between our homes. The morning of the meeting, I felt nervous, not angry, not afraid, just uncertain. I arrived first. 10 minutes later, Emily entered. She looked different, thinner, quieter, older. She sat down across from me. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she said, Thank you for coming. I smiled. Thank you for writing. She looked down. I couldn't say it out loud. I understood. Some truths are easier on paper. We talked for almost 2 hours. Not about the house. Not about the keys. Not about money. We talked about Robert. We talked about Sophie. We talked about grief. For the first time, Emily admitted something. When Dad died, I became scared. I looked at her. Why? Because you seemed stronger than me. That surprised me. She continued. You learned how to live alone. You kept going. You survived. Tears filled her eyes. I didn't. I finally understood something. Emily had not only been afraid of losing money, she had been afraid of becoming me. A widow, alone, responsible, strong. She whispered. I thought if we stayed in the house, everything would feel safe. I reached across the table. But it wasn't your safety to take. She nodded. I know. Then she asked the question. Can I have a key someday? The entire coffee shop suddenly felt quiet, because both of us understood what that question meant. Not a house key. Trust. Forgiveness. Access. I looked directly at her. Not now. She nodded immediately. No, I understand, I continued. But one day, maybe. Tears rolled down her face. That's enough. As we prepared to leave, Emily hugged me. Not quickly, not politely. A real hug. The kind daughters give mothers. The kind she had forgotten. Over the next several months, things slowly changed. Emily visited every Sunday. She called before coming. She knocked on the door. The first time she did, I smiled. You don't have to knock, she answered softly. I want to. Sophie spent weekends with me. Mark found a better job. They slowly paid their debts. Life remained difficult, but honesty had returned. One afternoon, almost 6 months later, Emily stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where everything had started. She looked around. The house feels different. I smiled. No. She looked at me. What? The house feels the same. She became quiet. I continued. The people changed. She nodded. Because she finally understood. The house had never been the problem. Money wasn't the problem. Fear wasn't the problem. The problem was forgetting who we were to each other. She forgot I was her mother. And I almost forgot that I deserved respect. That evening, after she left, I walked to the front door. I locked it. Then I unlocked it. The original key still rested in my hand. The same key, the same house, the same woman, but also not the same woman, because the woman who stood outside in the rain had disappeared. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood that love without boundaries becomes sacrifice. Someone who understood that motherhood does not require surrender. Someone who finally remembered her own worth. My daughter took my house keys, but in the end, I took back something far more important. My home, my voice, my peace, and myself. Life teaches us that love and sacrifice are not the same thing. Many parents spend their entire lives giving everything to their children. We give our time, our money, our energy, and sometimes even our identity. We tell ourselves that love means saying yes. We believe that putting ourselves last makes us good parents. But love without boundaries can slowly become permission for others to forget our value. Growing older does not make a person less important. Needing help does not remove dignity. And being a parent does not mean surrendering your voice. Linda's story is not really about a house. It is about respect. It is about remembering that kindness and weakness are not the same thing. Emily was not evil. She was afraid. Fear, debt, shame, and desperation caused her to make terrible choices. But those choices hurt the person who loved her most. The lesson is not to stop loving your children. The lesson is to love them without losing yourself. Forgiveness is possible. Healing is possible. Families can recover, but only when truth enters the room. Only when boundaries are respected. Only when everyone remembers who they are. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you loved? What would you have done in Linda's place? Please leave a comment and share where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Your story may help someone else feel less alone. And if these stories speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe and join this community of people who believe that it is never too late to reclaim your voice, your peace, and your life.